on. Here we go. Welcome, everybody. It's Friday afternoon. We're at the ThinkTech studios, downtown Honolulu. Our show here is Where the Road Leads. Ted Ralston, your host. We've got fantastic guests on today. You know how on this show, we talk about technology and technology leading us into the future, maybe paving that road to the future. Talking about technology as the art of problem solving at its highest level, and then with the pieces that fit that picture depending on the nature of the problem. We've been talking the last 6 weeks in here about immediate disaster management using Pahoa and the hurricane we had a month ago or so, and thinking about the immediacy of those situations and how we think about technology assisting in the preparation for that. We're going to talk a little bit different here today about the longer term aspects of disaster management in the sense of preparation and the subjects of resilience and changing society with new technology to help them get ready for issues that may come their way and minimize the consequences of those images. Again, we're talking about where the road leads. We have some people who've traveled that road a lot here at this table, all global travelers. In fact, it's unusual to find the three in the same room at the same time. Very difficult to arrange, by the way, I might say. And so let me introduce Dr. Dan Tolley out of Washington, D.C. from Soft Power Solutions, Inc., associated with an NHO, a Native Hawaiian organization as well, dealing with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, and the corollaries of that in the world of applied technology affecting resilience. We got Guy Akasaki on the far side, who is the CEO of a empire here in Honolulu with tentacles that reach across the world, and Brian Achong is president here in Honolulu as well with us. And we'll talk from both the manufacturer's perspective, which is what Guy and Brian represent, and the concept development perspective, which I think Dan brings to us. And we'll see how those two play out in the road to the future. So at this point, let me turn to Dan and ask Dan to give us some information on what this soft power solutions concept is all about, where that came from, where it's going, and we'll see how that fits into the picture of resilience and technology applied to the future.
Happy to do that, Ted. Soft power is a construct that's been developed literally over thousands of years, but it's been recognized by the Department of Defense and by the State Department over the past 10 to 15 years as a necessary element of getting societies to move forward. Soft power focuses predominantly on getting people to take their own way, to make their own leads. So what we're trying to do is enable the community to empower the community so that they can move forward with help from us, but also on their own. The goal there being to enable the leadership in those organizations. We looked at that over the past 3 or 4 years and did a reverse engineering process on it. And in doing so, we came up with 2 acronyms. The first of those is CREW. CREW stands for the things that your society has indigenous to it: climate, resources, energy, environment, and last but not least, water. When those are in perfect harmony with the population, you're in Hawaii, a long time ago. But everybody that finds this great place to be wants to come. And they bring with it more people, more problems, changing landscapes. And so societies develop what we call the prime elements to adjust to those. The prime elements stand for perception and education. I think my way out of the problem I've developed. Religion and ideology. I have come up with a way to visualize or to impact my society with concepts and ideas that they adjust for their own. The next one is improved energy and environment. After that is medical and health. A person whose family is healthy is usually not creating problems. And the last big one is E, economics. So those are the 2 elements that we bring together when we're assessing how to move a concept forward.
What's most amazing about that, Dan, I've heard that conversation many times and I've known each other for a couple of years here, and I keep hearing it again in a refreshed way every time. So obviously you're traveling in the world and dealing with the other nationalities and cultures and such, is continuing to increase that understanding of how this works. What's most strikes me is, as an engineer, we didn't talk about strength of materials once in that conversation. You didn't talk about voltage drop once in that conversation. Didn't talk about aerodynamic loads. So here we have an engineering approach being applied to society. And that is really a novel and well respected. I respect that incredibly, and I wish we could find some way to bottle it and take it forward. So at this point, let's turn to the other side of this, the side of manufacturing and production, which is what Guy and Brian are involved in here in Hawaii, and think about this changing society from the perspective you bring, which is developing business in Hawaii that is not only good for the users of what you produce, but also is beneficial to the Hawaiian business economy. We just heard about economics as being the end state here, and economics is exactly where you fit in. Give us your thoughts, Guy and Brian.
That's you. Go ahead. Speak a little here. Well, Greenpath technology is a focus around solar energy. We're solar centric. All our products or services are all designed around solar. We are a solar power contractor, so we do turnkey solar services. And on the manufacturing side, we do have a research and development department where we design, engineer, manufacture, and also sell, folding solar panels. Along with the folding solar panels, we develop ancillary products such as battery backups, battery systems, portable power, portable lights, and we're always looking and developing, more and additional products.
So that's an unusual aspect, to have an R&D organization associated with a installation operation here, especially in Hawaii. Typically, we don't see the R&D here much. So you guys are at the cutting edge of that. What's it like having an R&D operation here in Hawaii, far away from Washington, D.C. or any other place where you might think of funding is coming from for these things?
I think people think we're stupid, eh?
Yeah.
I hear all the acronyms that Dan is bringing up, right? The only ones I know is like, it's not, GM like for general manager, it's MG like Master Gopher. But I think from a holistic perspective, Hawaii is a great stepping stone into the Pacific Rim. I think in this theater too, we have so much things with the circle of fire, hurricane, tsunamis. You have so many issues with things that have to do with resilience, humanitarian assistance, disaster relief, the effect that it has to the military, keeping that friendliness with conflict nations. But yet at the end of it all, is being able to provide products that would fit that. And for us, we saw the opportunity working with the Office of Naval Research to develop products. What Brian is bringing up is the manufacture of the products, but the core value of why we got into it was for that purpose. And the one thing that we've kind of found out is the fact that we can make all these products that are mobile, they're portable, but at the end of the day, when you have a tsunami hit, or some disaster hits, where's the plug? There's nothing to plug into. And it's not pure sine wave. We have issues. So this is the reason why a lot of the products that we manufacture here in Hawaii, with some of the funding that we get from the Office of Naval Research through different entities like the Marine Corps Experimentation Center, the SED, basically fund these things, and then we take these products and we actually test it in real situations, such as in Philippines and in Thailand. So it does give us a sense of accomplishment, and it also meets the need. Like currently, all these different military exercises has actually resulted in us being able to provide for an NGO, something like Doctors Without Borders, portable power supplies that are solar-centric. So it's pretty fulfilling in that regards.
And so solar is a common denominator in a lot of areas, not only in the disaster management area, but even here in Hawaii, which has the largest, highest per capita solar rooftop operations anywhere in the country. Mm-hmm. And so this is indicative of sort of an emerging trend here, and that leads to almost thoughts like decentralizing the power system and this sort of thing. So the research and development you guys are doing is, I presume, allowing us to get more independent and more microgrid oriented, as we go forward. What do you see as the future of that aspect? Because it would fit so nicely both in the domestic and the disaster management arena.
Oh yeah. I think the missing element, I mean, when you look at solar, it provides power for today. You know, people ask me, says, when you have solar, so how much power can I generate at night? None. But it's being able to capture that energy. And that's where the technologies and battery solutions are beginning to become, you know, they're beginning to just escalate at this point. When you get to the place, and there are different offshoots from different companies such as Samsung, where they have 3.5K battery banks that are the size of a computer tower. So if you daisy link these guys together, you got 7K. If you got a $200 bill, you know, I mean, you could run this thing with 1 week with rain. But in terms of being resilient to take in the field, like we've developed some of our more ruggedized systems, you can actually power 24/7 off of these scenarios. So even though it's ruggedized, it does have its commercial application in a place like Hawaii where the highest kilowatt-hour rate prevails. Absolutely.
And Dan, in the prime and crew orientation you suggested earlier about how we sort of reverse systems engineer the needs, this opportunity or capability that Guy is talking about the ruggedized and portable and deployable solar power would certainly fit in that picture in the electrical demand area.
Absolutely.
And how about the demand side, the activity of reducing the demand so that systems like what Guy makes can do even more?
There's been a new resurgence of what we call energy savings companies, referred to as ESCOs. And the concept behind an ESCO is that you really want to move forward and reduce demand. Now, our company has recently purchased an ESCO that's been in business for 22 years, and we go after all of the elements of electricity. Lighting is only one, energy retrofit, motor control, new advancements in cooling technology. You bring those together, and normally for an average business, we can go in, make changes that don't affect the way people work, but reduce their power consumption somewhere in the 30 to 50% realm. And we've done that consistently.
So that's starting to drop down into the domain where Guy produces the power, and the two can come together nicely. Let's pick up that thought a little bit later after our first break here. I'll be back in 30 seconds.
Aloha, this is Keli'i Akina. It's my privilege to be the host of Ehana Kako, a weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Ehana Kako, what does that mean? Well, many people have heard of Epule Kako, let's pray together. Ehana Kako means let's work together. Let's work together to build a better economy, government, and society. And every week, Monday, from 2 to 3 o'clock, you will see movers and shakers and other people who are working together to build a better economy, government, and society. Again, I'm Keli'i Akina on the Ehana Kako weekly program on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Aloha. See you here Mondays, 2 to 3.
Ted Ralston here, folks, in the downtown Honolulu studios of ThinkTech Hawaii with our program Where the Road Leads, talking about technology paving that road with 3 fine examples of people who understand what the technology is and how that road can be paved. The road not just here in Hawaii, but Hawaii in a leadership position in business and benefiting the other aspects of the Pacific Rim. We were just talking before the break about how the ability to generate power, which is what we seem to have focused on here, and that was one of the prime and crew items.
Absolutely.
In fact, a very critical one is, as Guy mentioned, everything we have plugs in. You got to plug it in somewhere. So what Guy and his company are making and doing research and development on is the progressively more efficient, I'm putting it in my words, progressively more efficient, more capable, more rugged, more stable, solar-driven generating and power management systems.
Yeah, I believe so. You know, when you mention that, though, like as Dan had mentioned, when you have an ESCO where you're looking at demand, part of it is managing it, right?
Absolutely.
So we can make the battery bank, but at the end of the day, you know, you only have so many watts. So how do you break that down so for simplicity's sake? Like, say, for example, the package that we're presenting for this NGO that's in the emerging country, I believe it was in Cambodia, and they're out of San Francisco. Basically, we have a 2.5. Now, what function, why would they buy it? Because the numbers fit. Number 2, it has the resilience to be able to turnkey with the sun. But at the end of the day, you still have a limited amount of watts. So when you look at that and you're working with incandescent bulbs versus CFLs
LEDs.
or LEDs, it's 1/5 the cost, right? So what it does is in creating small, simple spreadsheets or smart, simple platforms, you're able to monitor that. So not only are you providing, I would just say, the conveniences of the future, if you could say, but you're also beginning to train them in sustainability and understanding that there is a cost and a value.
So that's the societal change that Dan was talking about.
Exactly.
It's the changing the mindset of the consumer
Correct.
and the user. That can apply domestically as well as in the developing countries. In fact, I would suspect as you get into the disaster situations, you can jump over and probably generate as much change there as you can anywhere, because there's no longer resistance to change. You've got to do something because you don't have anything. You just got wiped out.
Correct.
So that's an interesting issue, the societal change and the ability of we as people to pick up either schedule changes or behavior changes or whatever that better fits with the environment. And that actually leads to an interesting subject. How do we get this way in the first place? How do we get this interdependence and this dependence on the like centralized power grid? That's another discussion, I'm sure. I'm sure that's being discussed in many places around here right about now. But what we're heading for, and you guys are great exponents of that, is a progressive decentralization and increased responsibility on the part of the consumer. That's what's a most interesting aspect here. How do you see in the management world, Dan, the management of power that Guy was talking about, in your work in Saudi Arabia and your work in the Middle East and such? Is that concept catching on, the concept of managing my demand?
It's beginning to. A lot of countries around the world where energy was cheap or the people subsidized it has started to change. People are having to take 2 steps back and say, if energy is 30 cents a kilowatt hour and I have a 40-watt incandescent light bulb, a 10-watt CFL light bulb, and a 1-watt LED light bulb that give me the same amount of readability of the newspaper, which one should I use? People are getting to that point where they're asking that question. And yes, it'll cost a few dollars more in the beginning, but the payback, the long-term payback, the ability to come off of that centralized grid goes up exponentially. I know that Guy has been mentioning the Philippines, and we're working with the same folks over there. And what they're looking at now is rebuilding homes, putting in a light that's LED based. They can now power 20 homes where last year they could do 10. And oh, by the way, if the storm hits them, as long as the light doesn't get lost, it's probably going to work again. So you're looking at a more resilient situation as well as a more economical situation.
But the Philippines is not light, huh? It's not food, it's not light, it's not clothing, it's cell phones.
Cell phones are a big one.
So we've heard about that in other places in the Middle East. The ability to charge your cell phone is #1 on the hit parade, and that's back to available power and power management. As technology moves forward here, miniaturization, higher reliability, circuits and self-managing control, a lot of sensor functionalities at very small form factor and scale and cost. We're beginning to see, I think, the ability of the systems to control themselves based on the conditions they face. Like if there's no people in the room, why have the lights on? How do you see that developing here in your business, Guy? Do you see these sort of self-managing functions starting to show up?
Well, actually, you start to see them coming around, but what you have to do is actually, it's almost as simple as what we had mentioned about creating a simple spreadsheet so that they understand the function. Because part of it is that smart platforms are great, but they think for you. What we really need to do is learn how to think for ourselves, then allow the smart platforms to be an extension of that. And that's where what you folks had mentioned about the change in society, right? Change in society doesn't start because somebody brings a product on the scene. It's because the whys and the wherefores and the things occur here first. Then as you begin to engage, there's a reason and a rhyme to that technology that kind of makes sense. Yes, we do. And even in a portable power supplies we're incorporating that. But first steps is this, the training element.
What just came to mind, just sitting here thinking about it and hearing the conversation, I work with UAVs a lot, as you know, and we've had people in here talking about that. Margie and I just came back from a conference in Alaska on that subject, and there's more coming up. But one of the issues that UAVs face is the social license, the creation of a social license that lets society adopt that technology and use it, and there's components within there. I think the same thing is happening here, that we need to sort of have a social license to make it okay to decentralize the power system and use things like renewable energy, use things like on-demand control. So what we're doing in the UAV side of the house is thinking that there has to be sort of a common central clearinghouse where information, education, facts, and in the case of UAVs, the deconfliction with privacy issues and this sort of thing, and the law enforcement parameters and such, could be contained and could be made into like a one-stop shopping place, like a mall or something, or the UAV mall. We sort of need the same thing here, and distributed energy mall or something like that, where the demand can be looked at and the capability to supply, to provide that can be looked at, and the kids at the K through 12 level get enthused enough to think about that as their career from developing the higher level of technology.
Absolutely. I mean, to give you an example, we, in this area of renewable energy, we actually have a solar-powered air conditioner. When you mention about society, you know, trends, everybody has relied on the perspective from, like, say, the PV side on tax credits and subsidies. Only purely on tax credits and subsidies does the engagement for PV make sense, right? But to move away from it, to have it taken away, it's like, oh, what are you doing? You're taking away my pacifier. But in actuality, we should begin to understand that we do have the availability. Let's use it so that we don't have to rely on anybody else. So what we've actually engaged in, we actually have a product here that we're marketing in Ireland that basically is a solar-powered air conditioner that harvests the DC power directly from the panels into the unit itself without going back to the grid. So during the peak hours, when you need it, it's there. But the simple analogies you have is like a hot coffee cup. People ask, you know, but you know, I come home at night, so it doesn't work. And I went, yeah, there's no sun at night. But if like a hot coffee cup, if you put hot coffee into a ceramic cup, the coffee gets warm. If you heat up the cup, and then you put the hot coffee, the coffee stays hot. If you keep the house cool, when the sun is cooling it for you, you shut it on and off during the peak hours, the house, the floor, the entire structure, thermodynamics is cool. When you come home, you just sip on the electricity. So there's simple principles that apply even in the complex issues of society, HADR, that if we grab a hold of these concepts, it all makes very simple sense.
Where would we put that central clearinghouse, that central one-stop shopping center that would allow this kind of understanding to be developed, this kind of experience for people to understand what it's all about? How would we do that?
That's a good one.
Okay. In fact, I'll tell you what, for the last section here, what we're going to get to, I would like to ask each of you to think, while we're talking here, about what the one thing you'd like to have the audience take away from this conversation about where the future might want to go from the perspective you have in this regard. And then in the 10 minutes we'll talk about that. But this notion of a one-stop shopping, I mean, a shopping mall 50 years ago got created, and we understand how shopping habits formed. We're doing that on the UAVs. I'll just say it again. Some form of active education and awareness in the energy, self-dependence, resilience, and personal responsibility would be interesting. We know we have these disaster preparedness fairs. Just had one in Kailua last week. We had Manoa 2 weeks ago. We've had Waimanalo. We've had Eva. Something like that, dealing just with the energy aspect, would be an idea that would be worth putting out there.
It is, and I'll tell you, just sitting here with the three of you, I came up with a new little topic because we've been working on it. We've been putting Bluetooth on LEDs, so the LED becomes a Bluetooth receiver. What if we make the app to monitor where you are? You know, because as we all know, the worst thing about motion sensors is you sit at your desk to work and it goes off.
The lights go out.
How about if the light senses where your phone is and decides you're in the room it needs to be on, and it starts to track your use of electricity. Where are you using it? What are you doing with it? And correlating that to demand analysis. You know, how do you change? How do people use it? And it becomes a societal capability. You know, I start to track how people use energy, how they display it, when they forget to turn it off. You know, wouldn't it be nice if my smart TV knew I left the room? Okay, and it cut itself off and the electricity didn't get absorbed. And as I walked back to the room, I didn't have to get all the way there. As I walked back to the room, it sensed me coming back and turned back on. That's a different model than anything out in the market today. And I appreciate you guys making me think hard, because that's the kind of thing that as a society we can take on and move to the next level.
Now we need the sophomores in high school and
To
college
start
who are
working
out
on
there
it.
to think about that real
Absolutely.
hard, because we're getting past the point where we can actually, not these young kids over here, but I'm referring to the white-haired bunch here that's at this desk, right? This is fascinating. So a awareness and personal responsibility. I'm repeating it over again because it's such a novel thing that came to mind here. You see it all the time, I'm sure. You spoke it very well. And you have that embedded in Prime and Crew in the analysis you do. Taking that forward, for example, to Saudi Arabia. You're going to head there in a week or two, I understand.
Right.
How would that population, how would that culture see this conversation?
Well, that's the reason we keep going back to Crew and Prime. The elements of Crew and Prime are so universal. We've used it in conflict resolution in Burma. We've used it in Pakistan for reducing the threat of terrorism after the Quran burnings. It's the type of thing that gets people to talk about the problem, not the solution that someone had given them. And so now we can start to move into what I call the system engineering of society, which says, what do they want? What do they need? How can we use technologies like what Greenpath does, a process like I do to try to remove it, and move that society up with what we now refer to as societal enhancement technologies. How do you help them?
And if I can ask, Dan, again, I've heard probably 12 times now the Prime and Crew discussion, and each time it has a different great significance to me. For those who might have been joining this program late, can you, because it's so important, can you say again what those two acronyms refer to?
Real quickly, Crew is what a society starts with. It's the climate, the resources, the energy and environment that are there, and the water they have. And if they're in concert with society, it's wonderful. But society always pushes the edges. So we're never quite in concert, so we came up with the prime elements. The prime elements, P is for,
getting old is really tough.
Hitting those notes. Perception and ideology. How do I see myself? R, religion. I is improved energy and environment. You can see energy and environment so important, it shows up in both. M is medical and health, and E is the economics. And those are the things, the prime elements are the things that society changes to try to make their lives better. The crew elements are sort of what they have to live with.
So let's get back to that subject and how that might apply to Saudi Arabia or the Philippines or Puna, for that matter, on the Big Island after we get back from our next break.
My name is Alice Lee Hagan. I host the ThinkTech Hawaii BizEd Spotlight. We talk about fascinating people and interesting issues that affect our island state here in Hawaii. We broadcast every Thursday from 3 o'clock in the afternoon to 4 and on Olelo 54. Make sure you tune in and we'll see you soon. Aloha.
Hi, I'm Seymour Kazimirski. I host a show called Seymour's World on ThinkTech Hawaii. What is it all about? It's about you. It's about your experiences, my experiences, how we live life together. I'd like you to be my guest, listening in on what we have to say about today's world. Please be my guest on Seymour's World at ThinkTech Hawaii.
Ted Ralston here, folks, at the downtown Honolulu studios of ThinkTech Hawaii with our guests, Guy Akasaki, Brian Achong, and Dan Tolley. We're having a violently in agreement discussion on the role of energy conservation, and consumption management in changing society to a more resilient, more responsible role. And we just asked Dan to once again recite the systems engineering terms that'll let us begin to characterize those elements that we can work on from a technology perspective to affect society in a positive way. So what we've heard, Dan, again, that method of analysis, tell us how you're going to play that out in Saudi Arabia.
Okay, so part of it is to sit down with the leadership there and find out what is important to them. Right now, a big item for them is medical and health of their citizenry, as well as reducing energy consumption. Now that means you're going to be adding new equipment, but you have to start making it energy efficient. You can't just go after one side of it. So we're going to be helping them look at the types of technology to come in for, say, CAT scans, X-rays, computer systems, as well as things that we don't normally think about in health, refrigeration. A lot of medical facilities that we do have to have very uniquely controlled refrigeration. The way we classically did that was with very highly controlled, very expensive refrigerators. There's a new one that I'm working with now that's hitting the market that is a solid state refrigerator. It has no moving parts. It uses 30% less energy and doesn't use Freon. Completely different model than anything we've seen before. And tying it to a ruggedized solar array, all of a sudden I have refrigeration in the middle.
So you take the air conditioning aspect that he's already got going,
right.
Just drop it down 10 more degrees, we have refrigeration.
Oh, so you need a popsicle.
High temperature popsicle.
So that's the type of thing that we're going to be looking at over there with them.
So in that sense, the M component of Prime, medical, and the health components of that, and the E component, energy, and improved energy management were important, very important to them.
Very important, and the other thing is we don't want to upset the others. We have to be culturally sensitive on the perception, on the religion, and we have to make sure it fits in the economic model. So you always want to try to move one or two of those elements up and not drive the others down.
And that term economic model showed up in your conversation several times and in your conversation several times. And what draws all of this together is at the end of the day, this whatever we develop has to be commercially, economically survivable. It has to be, it can't be based on a rebate system or something like that. It's got to stand on its own. So society has to start accepting that, and we have to start realizing that as on the supply side, we have to be sensitive to that. So, Dan, how would you take the emerging capabilities in health and medicine and energy consumption and check them back against the crew function, which is where the demand function is created?
Right. A lot of the things that we're doing in crew, especially in third world areas and in developing areas, is that the climate is difficult to live in. Many of these places have grown in the past 20 to 30 years with the advent of cheap energy, major capability to produce large amounts of energy, but as the world keeps growing, we keep consuming more and more. We're taking that step back and asking, how much does it cost to reduce energy? So the work we're doing in the energy savings company part actually goes in and asks, how much money do I save by reducing my energy? And is there a positive payoff? In most cases, the payback period in there is 4 to 5 years. You can reduce your energy consumption for the long term and break even in 4 to 5 years. And that's the goal of an ESCO, is to loan that money to those businesses to make that transition and get it back through the reduction of cost.
And we could, that's a common equation that could apply here, it could apply in the Philippines or other areas you deal, it could apply in Saudi Arabia. And that's what we have to respect, is that these things have to be economically sound at the end of the day.
I think taking it one step further, what Dan's saying is that it's really true when you do the savings, right? When you're looking at businesses or society in itself, there are true savings. But when you really look at it from a realistic standpoint, if there could be, in fact, a savings of, say, 100 grand a month in energy savings, for that business to generate that net 100,000, they would probably have to expend $1 million worth of revenue to net out that 100,000. So what happens in the production of that $1 million worth of revenue, what will happen is there's a lot of energy that's wasted again in order to generate that bottom line. So by doing that, it's not only saving, you're basically reducing your carbon footprint. Yeah.
Now, in terms of your work in the Philippines, and tell us about other areas you're working in, Guy, besides Philippines, and how this conversation might play out there.
Well, we have them in Thailand, Philippines. Actually, we are looking at some refugee camps, and this is just outside of Syria. It's hard to imagine, but one camp there is 1 million people in tents, and they've been there for 6 years, and they're not about to move. But they got tons of generators, busting up plenty propane and a lot of diesel, and they're just existing. They've established their lifestyle there. So these are things that we're looking at, where again there needs to be a replacement of, but also an education in the replacement of, so that they better understand, right? It's one thing just to create sustainability. It's another thing to get them to understand why the changes are coming. Because you know what, that's one generation. The next generation will grow out of these crisis camps as well, right? Refugee camps.
So the concept of an educational one-point shopping function we spoke of here on Oahu is also necessary in the populations that you're dealing with, and that's probably true around the world, because we've been so jaded, perhaps, or been so influenced by 10 cents a gallon oil. Of the past.
Absolutely.
And developed an entire infrastructure of the world based on that, and that's not going to work anymore. And you could probably have this conversation about energy, that we've focused on energy here, on almost any one of the prime elements.
Absolutely.
And the same approach would apply. We probably have to generate some form of awareness, some form of technology influencing the other aspects here as time goes on. So I think what that tells me is the next 6 weeks, which is what Prime has 6 letters in it, doesn't it, or 5, whatever it may be, 5. Next 5 weeks, we're all going to be here on Friday afternoon talking about that subject and bringing our great insight together, and hoping we can have some of our people in the audience think up questions they want to send us, contact us. Zuri, would you tell the audience how they can get a hold of us and present questions to us?
So on screen, you do see our Twitter handle. You can tweet us at ThinkTechHI. You can also find us online. I'll pull that up now. So that's www.thinktechhawaii.com. You'll see all of our contact information there. We'd love to have you a part of the show.
Okay, thank you very much. And the other thing I want to say here is that we're trying to get people on the show twice in a row, because there's not enough time to talk about the subjects that come up and have them extend. And after you've been here more than twice, you get to host the show. So let me just throw that threat in front of you here. All doing Jay's bidding, of course. But now the last part of the panel discussion is always to ask our experts here what they would want the audience to most take away from this conversation for their own future, and what you might have learned from this conversation. You know, here we all are, old people still learning stuff. So let me turn to the order in which, let's reverse the order in which we went first, and put you on the spot, Brian, and build the pressure up in terms of what you'd like to have people who heard this conversation think about the subjects we spoke of, and think about their role, and think about how they need to operate and behave in the future.
Okay. I think the most important thing for people is just to understand and that there are alternatives to reducing your energy consumption. And I know now there's a lot of education going on in the lower grades, middle schools, high schools. You know, there's STEM organizations going on all the time. There's robotics competitions, you know, and a lot of them, they're getting into using renewable energy or photovoltaics, the sun to power all their equipment. I do think it is moving up the chain there. Maybe the next generation will be a lot more energy efficient than we are, but that's what I.
So you would like to have the K through 12 generation and education in general spend a lot of attention on these problems that we have created for them,
yes.
that we're going to leave behind after we take off.
Yes.
Great. Guy.
I guess phrase would be, when no can, can. And I think if we have that mindset, even as adults, it really is going to start with the next generation. But we have to set the root first. It's like Brian's talking about the education feature. I had to speak in a class at Punahou, and they were talking about solar. And I asked the science teacher, why gotta I speak on solar? All the kids know, the parents are going to say, it saves us money. And they're going to go, here we go again. Mom and dad talking about how much they save. But when I went to speak to these kids, I had 100 kids I spoke to. I talked about paintball. And they went, what has that got to do with solar? Then I showed them the panels that we made and the bullet holes. And I showed some relevance because they played war. And all of a sudden, I just got caught up. And what happened over the next 4 days after that class was finished, because we're talking about PV and how it can integrate into all the toys and tools and the things you could do, that's where the engagement starts. But it takes us bringing out simple illustration and platforms so they can grab a hold of the principle, almost like the coffee cup with the hot coffee inside. That's where it starts. Then you bring in the complexity into the simplicity of the thought and the core values and direction.
Once again, education, and once again, the experiential aspect of it, but straightforward and simple without all the complication that we normally lay on things. Fascinating. So if we had this center somewhere here in Kaka'ako or someplace where we had a sandbox type operation of every function we can think of that's in this way, it could have a K through 12 component as well. It could have a kupuna level as well.
Yeah.
Yes.
And cover the full range. Wow. Let's do it.
Sound like a plan.
Dan?
I would challenge the businesses and the schools to look over into the ESCO world and say, how far can you get today so that those kids' starting point is where technology can take us? Because today, in the science realm, we're at a whole new level. Things that we can do for energy savings today, 10 years ago, were not even fathomable. But if the child today thinks that that's just standard, where's his mind going to take him in the next 10 to 15 years? Because they're going to stand on our shoulders. We need to stand those shoulders as high as we can.
That's a fascinating idea. So push on us today, businesses and any form of the infrastructure, to identify the vision it can take us to with what it knows today. And that's the basis for having the K through 12 and the grad programs and such launch off from.
Right.
Yeah, it's really huge. It's really good. We're doing a prototype for a school in Waianae. And basically on this school, we're putting on the solar air conditioner because the school kids cannot study because it's so hot. But they cannot just put PV without tying into the grid. Here they can run it independent of the grid. It doesn't require utility. And school occurs between the peak demand period of the sun. Huge. Will the kids benefit? Will they begin to understand? They feel it, they'll sense it, they'll study better, and they'll think about what is there in front of them. It's how it's presented to them. So it's a great platform. We do have it all around us. It's like, no can, but I think can.
So turning no can into can, that's fascinating. A bumper sticker we need for this operation. Well, that takes us to the concluding part of our show here. So I wanted to thank you guys very much, Guy Akasaki, Ryan Achong, and Dan Tolley. What a fascinating discussion, and I always learn something talking to each of you, and it's great to be able to even interact with you, and especially when we're all together here. So I thank you so much for that, and I'm sure the audience does as well. And we'll be back next Friday at ThinkTech Studios with Where the Road Leads. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.